Well, working with the DAW is so much fun and you can quickly sketch ideas, sketch loops, record them and have like a basic song idea there in basically a few minutes. It can be difficult sometimes to step out of the sound of the loops, and especially for drums, I realized that I struggle with this sometimes, that I have this initial idea for a drum beat, I'm really happy with it, and I keep using the same drum beat all the time, but there's a point where I feel like, okay, it's still this drum loop and it's great, but there should be a little bit of variety, at least sometimes, because there are also situations where it's amazing that the drum beat is exactly the same all the time, but sometimes also little changes can do wonders. And I don't mean like crazy drum fills that are completely out of nowhere and distracting from the main idea of the music, but little things that just give you the idea that there's more like a storyline to the whole drum part, rather than just one loop that got dragged to some maximum length and then that's everything there is. And that's why I want to share 5 things in this video with you that I particularly like to try if I feel this way, and usually 1 or 2 of them always work. If you're new here, let me quickly say hi. My name is Yannis and I'm a drummer myself, but also producing music, and here I make tutorials about creative music production. So in case you enjoy this video, you can already keep in mind that there's more to be found on my channel. For this video I just programmed a little sample beat and I'm quickly going to play it for you because we're going to use it for all 5 examples. The first thing I always try to do is making more than just one version of the beat, because usually you start with one version of your beat, but you can, out of any beat, make at least 6 or 7 different versions already, no matter how simple it is. And it's also important here to give them names, so we call our full version, for example, full beat, and then we just duplicate it and make other versions out of it. So for example, we can make one version without the hi-hat, and then we just give it the name no hi-hat, and make another duplicate, and for example here we keep the hi-hat, but this one doesn't have the kick drum, and you just mute it, and then we have a no kick version. And also let's copy the full beat once more. You can, for example, change a bit the accent, so maybe you mute the first snare and you mute a kick drum and also some hi-hat notes. I mean, this is a little random now, but usually this way you also create some sub-version of your beat that you can sometimes use as a variation. So if we have, for example, the name, let's call this limited. That's a weird name. You have to just use something that is clear for you. Sometimes in the moment I'm struggling to always come up with the perfect name. You can adjust it, of course, on the go. But so, for example, we have the full beat. And often it works well to use those in a 4th bar. So like no kick is always very efficient. Let's again listen to it 3 times and then go to the limited. Actually, I wanted to go to the no hi-hat part. And I mean, those examples are super simplified, but you can do this with any beat, no matter how simple it is, and easily create like 5, 6, 7 versions. And it's way easier to do this in the beginning, because otherwise you're like, I'm going to do this later, and then while you're making the arrangement, you're always using the same drum beat still, because you're like, I'm going to make the variations later. But if you do it in the beginning, and as you can see, it takes a couple of minutes, you already create this pool of different versions of your beat, and it's just way more efficient for your workflow. Next thing is also super simple, yet highly efficient and possibly quite overlooked, maybe because it's so simple, which is making the loop longer than just 1 bar. Because if it's just a 1 bar loop, it gets repeated so frequently that as a listener, you also hear the same over and over, and you're like, yeah, it's kind of the same over and over again, like a loop. But if you make it longer, and just manage to have like 1 or 2 points where there's a tiny variation or storyline inside, for example, a 4 bar loop, It sounds like something less loopy, because also the longer it is, the more you forget that it might have been there already. So that's a very interesting thing to look at. And in this case, in your DAW, you can always duplicate your clips. So here in Ableton, I can duplicate, then I have 2 bars, and I can duplicate once more, so I have 4 bars. And it's really intuitive on where you do the variations. You can basically just click on notes and vary them. Here in this case, I would definitely do it with the kick drum, because we have the steady hi-hat rhythm and the snare backbeat. You shouldn't really mess with that, but you can just change the kick drum maybe on 2 or 3 positions. And just sharing now what I particularly like, I always like to at least remove 1 note on the 1 of the kick drum, because if you always have the 1 on every bar, it can become a bit static. So let's just remove some note here. And here, for example, I would then add a note, because it sounds like here we leave some space. So here we can respond to that space. And although we have a loop, we can create some small storytelling inside this one loop. So think of this kind of call and response thing. You don't really have time to if you just have 1 bar, but you can already do this if you have 4 bars. And so let's listen once more. And here again, I don't want to have the note on the 1, and it's actually, I realized that the velocity from before is saved, so those were a little softer. I'll quickly make them louder, around 100. And I also like to make it a little more busy in the end. And here I might even try, okay, now it's more than 3 notes that I changed, but also it's nice to make it a little more obvious to increase the tension a little in the end of this 4-bar loop. And let's listen to the whole thing. By the way, if you're generally interested in learning more about rhythm and how you can make individual parts of your song, not only drums, but also bass, synths, rhythmically more exciting, I warmly invite you to check out a full class that you can find on my Skillshare profile. It's giving you a little toolkit of things you can try with your music in order to develop its full potential rhythmically. And there's a link down below in the description with which you can register on Skillshare 1 month for free and just try this class. Also, you can find more classes also from me. See if it's for you, and otherwise just cancel anytime without any strings attached. Next thing I always like to try is to play some part of the beat myself. I mean, okay, I'm a drummer, so I often enjoy playing things myself, although I also really like to do it just with the computer. But there's one thing that I think is particularly efficient, even if you say, I don't have any sense of rhythm if I play, I suck at finger drumming. I also suck at finger drumming, but that's why I'm going to use it in a second to demonstrate this to you. What I find really efficient is to separate your groove into the kick and snare part, so you can just basically make a duplicate. And let's say here we mute the hi-hat, or you can also basically delete it, but I'm going to mute it here because I still need it. And here you mute actually here you delete basically everything because we're going to record it. And why did I do this? Kick and snare sound great if they are really tight, but if they are really tight, there's some space for the hi-hat to be a little less tight. It might sound weird, but if you listen to some legendary beats, you often hear that the hi-hat phrasing is something very particular and is actually not so metronomically precise. It dances around just the borders in terms of rhythmic definition, although this sounds now really weird, but maybe you can follow. And you can imitate that by playing it yourself, and just even if you think your playing is really untight, you can still quantize it a little, not 100%, but just maybe 20 or 30%. And that's why I just want to record a few bars with my pad here, finger drumming. And again, it's a good example because it's this one. I really don't enjoy finger drumming. And also I recommend doing it for a couple of bars, because if you have like 4 bars again, or even 8 bars, there's more variation over time. And so your beat sounds a little more dynamic, because subconsciously I think people realize that there's a little element that varies a little more and sounds like it has been played continuously rather than just looped. And as I mentioned, I hate finger drumming, and that's why also this performance was really bad, and somehow I never managed to feel comfortable on those pads. Maybe it's just because I prefer using sticks. But that's why this is really shaky, but somehow even without any quantization, I feel like it adds some life to the beat. And just listen to it and see if you feel a little similar. Also, the velocity is really changing. But if it's too much for you, you can just kind of mark all of them, right click, and I mean this is Ableton specific, but I think it works in any DAW, quantize settings, and then we are playing 16th notes, but we just want a little, because if you do 100%, it's just going to sound like you draw it inside the grid yourself. But I like that you can just do like tiny bits, and this way make it a little tighter, but keep the kind of irregularities that came from your playing. And you can also add some velocity effect or just make sure that it's not so jumpy, but I think you get the point. And I find this super fun all the time, and especially if you're not a drummer, you can actually really use it because you don't have to be too tight. You can always bring it to some point where it works but still carries your kind of signature. The next concept is a little like the second one I've shown you, where we made like a longer structure, so the loop had like 4 bars in total, where we were then playing with the positions of the kick drum. And it's kind of similar here, but we're going to do something with the snare or backbeat or whatever you use for the kind of, backbeat sound. And let's again duplicate it. Maybe this time it's enough to start with a 2-bar loop. And the idea is to use something called ghost notes. And if you don't know what it is, it's basically like another additional stroke that is softer than the main stroke. So for example, for the clap here, it would mean that you have, for example, here a ghost note that is softer. And we can also use those sometimes to break a bit the loopy feeling, because just 2 or 3 of them can work wonders, especially, for example, in the end of a loop. So they are like some subtle way of a drum fill. And actually, just let's make it very simple. After 2 bars, there's just this tiny ghost note. And I feel it's more efficient to also duplicate it again, because then here we can add 1 or 2 more. And I just had to play a bit with it quickly to see where they work. And you can see, so this was our first section. There's only the ghost note in the very end of the 2nd bar. And then here I have the same one also after the 3rd bar. And then in the 4th bar added more, like here even 2 in between, and here 1 directly before the accent and 2 again in the end. And just listen to it once, how it sounds like. And the last thing I want to share with you is possibly the most experimental idea of those 5, and also depends a bit on your DAW how this is possible, because we're going to use some randomization. Because in Ableton you can open another menu here for the clip and then select some chance for those notes, which means for all the notes we have, it's 100%. So if we program a note, there's going to be a note. Sounds obvious, but it's the way it is. And I'm going to draw ghost notes everywhere for the clap, except from the positions where we have kind of the accents. And then we mark all of them like the ghost notes, not the accents. And pull down this knob for chance to maybe 10%, because this means there's only like 11% chance that the notes will be triggered. So we have some random ghost note generator that just every now and then will sneak in little ghost notes that will break a bit the repetitive feel of the beat. Let's see how this works. And of course, if you increase the chance, you will have more of those ghost notes. And of course, it's just some obvious example. You don't have to use all positions. You can also pick just 2 or 3 that you like and just have the chance set to some value for them. So this way it's still a bit random, but I just want to show you how it works so you understand the main principle. And of course, you could do this for the kick drum as well, which can sound really funky. I'm going to remove it for the clap now. So let's say we have some additional kick drum positions. And here it makes sense to remain or to kind of have some kick drum positions where you know they have to be there all the time, like the ones we programmed at first. But then we have some positions that are kind of optional. So let's just demonstrate it with those few notes here and put it to maybe like 34 to make it more obvious. And all of a sudden we have some random drum machine for the kick drum, which is also fun. But again, it's a more experimental approach, and if you're really about controlling exactly what happens, this might not be for you. But sometimes it's also good to use this for just listening to it for a couple of minutes in order to come up with ideas, and then you can still fix the one you liked. But sometimes the computer has ideas that you wouldn't end up with just thinking about it or trying with your own techniques. So it's just a little consulting that is fun to get sometimes. If you have some concepts that you really like to use for making your drum beats sound less loopy, you're also warmly invited to share them in the comments, because I think everybody has some unique techniques of doing those things. Otherwise, I warmly invite you to watch this playlist if you're interested in just more general ideas about creating music inside a DAW. Apart from that, I just wish you inspiration with whatever it is that you create and really hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!